And when we know that God is good, that is why we can be grateful for our healing now. Yes, yes? Well, good morning again, Celebration Spiritual Center. It's so good to be here with you. I want to dive right in because we have a few things to discuss today. As you know, our message series is Thank You for My Healing. And last week we started with the topic, Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Life. And I dealt with the idea that there are two pieces that are required in order for us to heal, or really three pieces I dealt with. The first is to understand that the universe is mental, that life is actually mental. Anything that we see out here in this world that we see with our physical eyes first existed in mind. Everything exists in mind first. And so we recognize that that's the realm of cause. So whatever we're seeing or experiencing out in our life, if we recognize that we need or require or desire healing, then we recognize that we must go to the realm of cause. We must go to mind. And so we must heal our minds in order to heal our lives. Now, the first part of that, and this is reflected as I talked last week in the Me Too campaign. We have to talk about it. For so long, many of the things that need to be healed in our lives have been repressed, or we've been scared to talk about it, or we didn't feel heard. And so it's important that we first bring it up, that we talk about it. And so often, many times, we're afraid to talk about it because we think we'll be overwhelmed by the feelings. What I shared last week is that it's showing up because it doesn't belong to you. It wants to get out of your system. So we talk about it. But if we just talk about it, and many of us do, we talk about it for years and years and years, and that's become a way for us to then manage that story. And then we're kind of functionally dysfunctional, as I said last week. So we recognize that we bring it up and we talk about it so that then we can actually heal it. And we talked about using the tool of forgiveness, specifically radical forgiveness, as it has come to us through Colin Tipping. And so we want to move forward this week, and I want to share a story with y'all. Is that okay? There's a book that many of you know I love called Think and Grow Rich. It's full of so many different stories, so many micro stories. And in the introduction, of Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill tells the story that's titled 3 Feet from Gold. And he talks about a man who goes to Colorado. He gets the gold fever, right? And he wants to mine some gold because everybody's making all this money, and he wants to be a part of this thing. And so he goes over to Colorado, and he starts mining for gold, and he finds gold. And he realizes that he's found a gold mine. And so he needs more money to get the equipment and the things that are needed in order for him to actually get all of this gold and make the money. So he comes back home to Maryland. He goes to his family and he says, I found this gold. We can all make a lot of money, but I need your investment. I need you to participate with me and invest some funds so that we can buy the equipment and mine the gold. And so the story goes on like this. The first car of oil was mined and shipped to a smelter. The returns proved that they had one of the richest mines in Colorado. A few more cars of that oil ore would clear the debts. Then would come the big killing and profits. Down went the drills. Up went the hopes of Darby and his uncle. Then something happened. The vein of gold ore disappeared. They had come to the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold was no longer there. They drilled on desperately, trying to pick up the vein again, all to no avail. Finally, they decided to quit. They sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s and took the train back home. Some junk men are dumb, but not this one. He called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do a little calculating. The engineer advised that the project had failed because the owners were not familiar with fault lines. His calculations showed that the vein would be found just 3 feet from where the Darbys had stopped drilling. This is exactly where it was found. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counsel before giving up. Napoleon Hill writes further, one of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. Every person is guilty of this mistake at one time or another. Now, this brother, R.U. Darby, again, and his uncle, they failed. They were 3 feet from gold, but he heard the story about what he missed out on. And he actually ended up becoming one of the most profitable insurance salesmen in this country. He was known to have sold $1 million in insurance a month. And he said when asked why was he so successful, he said, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I will never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy insurance. He took that lesson and he realized that never again would he stop. Never again would he give up. He decided that he was going to persevere. And so this morning, as we affirm, thank you for my healing, I want you to remember and understand that your healing is imminent. It may have taken years. It may have been years to get you to this point, to even get you to a place that is saying to you that, yes, you can heal. Yes, you can heal your mind. Yes, you can heal your life. Yes, you can heal your body. It may have been years since you've gotten to this place, and you may have heard other people say things or tried other things, tried other potions, tried other medications, tried other rituals, tried all kinds of things, crystals, whatever it may be. But what I want you to understand, and I'm inviting you today not to give up, but to persevere, because you're just 3 feet from gold. You're just 3 feet from your healing. Now, there's a story in the Bible that reflects the same idea. It's one of my favorite stories of healing. This woman was also 3 feet from gold, and she persevered. I'm sure we all know this story. It's called by many different names: the woman with the issue of blood, the woman with the flow of blood, the woman who was hemorrhaging. And we find this story in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You know, what's interesting about that, just for my Bible scholars, when we find a story that appears multiple times in the Gospels, one, this can give us a clue that it may have actually really happened, right? What it also tells us is that we recognize that the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all pulled from one source. And that source was actually not stories, but it was actually sayings of Jesus. And then the narrative was written around it. So what we can see from recognizing that this story appears in 3 of the Gospels, that this, for many reasons, was considered a very important story, and that most likely was found in this original source, which is known as Q. And so we have this woman. In the Gospel of Matthew, it doesn't give us much information about the woman. But in Mark and Luke, we get this story that's familiar that tells us a little bit about her. And it says, "And there was a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, 'If I touch even his garment, I shall be made well.'" Now, what's interesting to me, although, again, in the Gospel of Mark, we get some beautiful information. We get this information that this infirmity, this hemorrhaging that she had been experiencing it for 12 years. Not only had she been experiencing this for 12 years, but it says, "And she had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse." Now, I want you to think about whatever the situation is that you want to heal in your life. Whatever the circumstance it is that you're seeking to heal, shift, or change in your life. It may feel just like this woman, that for 12 years you've been dealing with this issue. It may feel like this woman that you've even sought out help. You've sought out the help of professionals. You've sought out the help of those or the assistance of those that are supposed to know what to do, but still she suffered under these physicians and spent all that she had. Now, I love this when we look at these clues in the text, because this tells us that she was a woman of means. The fact that she could spend all that she had to even seek medical attention tells us that she's a woman of means. But there's something else that's very interesting when we understand her desire to persevere, how powerful it was. Because if you understand the time that she was living in, and if we put on our historical critical lens and look at the text, we understand that she was a Jewish woman, and that meant that she was under Levitical law. Now, according to Levitical law, this tells us that she wasn't just sick. She wasn't just sick in the sense of something was happening. She was having this hemorrhage that could not be stopped. She was also considered by the religious leaders in her community, she was considered ceremonially unclean. Now, why is that? Because if we put on our lens and look at the patriarchy that's in the text, and particularly in the Levitical law, we recognize that a woman was considered unclean during her menstrual cycle. That meant that every month, a woman was considered judged by God. That meant that every month a woman felt shame. She had to be outside of the community. She couldn't be touched. If any man touched her, then he became unclean, and then he had to move outside of the community as well and sacrifice and do different things to become clean and right within the eyes of God. We got to understand what she was going through. It wasn't just that she had, again, some type of sickness or dis-ease and all of the discomfort that brought, but it also meant that she was an outsider in her community. At that time, and we see this also when we look at what we would probably understand to be epilepsy in this day and time, that anyone who had any type of infirmity or dis-ease that wasn't understood at that time, they were considered evil, they were considered full of sin, and they were pushed outside of the walls. And so this woman was dealing with this for 12 years. It was also thought at that time that, again, if you had any kind of infirmity that couldn't be cured, then this was a judgment from God. Job's story. You must have done something to piss God off. But how many of us still believe those things? If we're honest with ourselves today, God must be mad at me. God can't love me. If I experience this thing that I need to be healed from now, God ain't here. Or it's judging me. How many of us have felt unclean in our own lives, felt like an outsider? But this is something that needs to be healed. Now, what I love about this woman is, in spite of this, in spite of the Levitical law, in spite of how she had to have been treated by those outside of her, she did something very interesting. The fact that she touched the hem of Jesus' garment speaks to her faith, what I call a risk of faith. Because she understood, she was not scared thinking that I'm going to make Jesus unclean if I go reach out trying to get my healing. You see that? You have to understand that because of that act, she did not fully believe that she was in judgment under God. She had to believe something about her worth. She had to believe something about her inherent goodness to defy this law that said that she was unclean, and further that this law said you cannot touch another man, let alone a rabbi, a teacher. There was something that she had to believe about herself in order for her to take this risk of faith, in order to stand in this idea of saying, if I just touch even his garments, I shall be made well. The other part I love about this, in Mark, it says that she had heard reports about Jesus. Why do I love that? Well, because it reminds me, if you go back to the beginning of this year in January, we did a series on the roots of new thought. And that first message was, I tried it for myself. One of the things I love about new thought is that physical healing is something that really is at the very beginning and something that really gave birth to the founders of the movement. The founders of this movement were experiencing dis-ease that was incurable at the time in their day, things like tuberculosis. But using and recognizing that God lives within them and that through the power of their thought, they can heal their minds and heal their life, heal their body, so it was. Right? We have stories and experiences of those that were considered even an invalid at the time and could not walk, but got a hold of this truth that God loves me unconditionally, that I'm not being judged, that this thing that's happening in my body right now is not a judgment from God, but is simply a result of a pattern of thinking that I can change at any time. And I change this pattern of thinking, and I can experience a new life. I can walk freely. I can live freely. And not only that, I have power, but I can thrive, and I can be prosperous on this planet. And they took hold of that idea. They tried it for themselves and experienced healing. And so, similarly, this is what we must do. As she heard the reports about Jesus, she had heard that there was a man that not was healing people, but was igniting their faith so that they could heal themselves. We have the story of the two blind men that came to Jesus and said they wanted to be healed. And he said, do you believe that you can be made whole? They said, yes. His response, your faith has made you whole. Not, I'm big magnanimous Jesus and I'm the one that's going to heal you. That's not what he said. He said, do you believe it? Do you believe that you can be made whole? They said yes. He said, your faith, your belief. And so we recognize that many times it's the hearing that ignites our belief. Many of you have been coming to CSC for quite a long time. You may have heard the love stories and the testimonies of many in our community, those that have been healed of physical ailments, those that have healed their relationships, those that have been healed from the roots of abuse, those that have been healed from the roots of negative thinking, those that have been healed from the roots of limiting thinking, those that have been healed from the roots of small thinking. And now you're ready to try it for yourself. Because you recognize that you're just 3 feet from goal. Now, I love this, and it parallels in all 3 texts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a couple things that Jesus says in response. Now, the story is a little different depending on which text you read, because we have that, what's actually happening at this moment, we get a 2-for-1 miracle in this moment if you read the text. Because just before we meet this woman, we meet a man by the name of Jairus, whose daughter is dying. And so he, like this woman, had heard about Jesus, and he seeks Jesus out, and he's like, my daughter is dying. I need you to come right away so that you can heal her. And so Jesus is like, okay, right? And while he's on his way to heal Jairus' daughter is when the woman touches the hem of his garment, right? And so in some stories, in some tellings of the story, which I always love because I can just imagine the disciples, in one telling of the story we have where Jesus says, who touched me? And the disciples are like, Jesus, you see all these people around here? Like, I don't know who touched you. It could be anybody. We're in a crowd. And he's like, no, I felt the power. Who touched me? And then the woman says, it was I, right? In another telling of the story, we don't get any of that dramatization. And I love when we get the dramatization in the text. We don't get that in all the texts. But what's interesting is at each time that the healing takes place, he says some very similar words. In Matthew, he says, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. In Mark, he says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. And in Luke, he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. So here again, we get the exact same thing with Jesus. It's always clear. I don't know why people put Jesus as the great miracle worker when that's not what he demonstrated. What did he say to her? Your faith has made you well. Not my power has made you well. Your faith has made you well. So recognize that the healing that you desire, your faith, your belief, your knowing, your understanding, not Pastor Greg's faith, not Pastor Yolanda's faith. Now we stand similarly in the way that Jesus stood to remind you of the truth of who and what you are, to remind you that all things are possible, to remind you that you can be, do, or have whatever you want, to remind you that you can continue to thrive in spite of what you may have experienced. We're here to stand as reminders of that. That's what we do. But it is not because we have any kind of power that miracles and answered prayers take place in your life. It's because of your own power. Your faith has made you well. Now, I want to break down a couple words that I love that he uses here. Now, he uses the word daughter. Daughter is interesting. Because again, we have this woman who, based on the Levitical law and based on what was going on in her time, was considered unclean. But the word daughter that he uses is a Greek word, thugater. And what that word means is daughter of God or acceptable to God. This is important. In A Course in Miracles, we quote it all the time. I remain as God created me. In other words, you were created perfect, whole, and complete, and God only sees you that way. You were created perfect, whole, and complete. That's why Pastor Yolanda and I only see you that way. She was created perfect, whole, and complete, which is why Jesus only responded to her using this powerful word, calling her daughter of God or acceptable of God. In other words, she was never unclean. She was never unworthy. There was never anything wrong with her. That law was not the truth of life. And he was acknowledging that in that moment by calling her daughter. And I love, again, that we have that word in every version of the text. But then there's another word. Your faith has made you well. This is the New Revised Version. If you look in the King James Version, you'll see the word whole. And that word, the Greek word, is sozo. Whole, sozo, well, sozo. What does that word mean? To save, keep safe and sound, to rescue from danger. It goes on, to save a suffering one from perishing, one suffering from disease, to make well, to heal, to restore to health. And that restore to health, that's my favorite one. It's my favorite because this is where we can understand what healing is really all about and why it's possible. Now, as I already said, we talked about this idea last week that everything comes from the realm of mind, yes? Nothing exists. I'm a broken record on this. The chairs that you're sitting on, you all understand and know that somebody thought of it first. It wouldn't exist if it hadn't existed in mind first, right? And so when we understand our healing, and particularly we're talking about physical healing here, this word of your faith has made you well, has restored you to health. Healing is a restoration back to what is. The only reason you can be healed, the only reason you can come back to wholeness is your wholeness has to exist in the realm of mind. Therefore, healing is really restoration. It's coming back to something that already is. It's not creating something that doesn't exist. It's bringing into existence here what already exists in the non-physical. That's so very important. Because so often the reason why we're missing our healing is because we're thinking that something that doesn't exist, we're trying to make that exist. But your healing, your healed self, your healed mind, your healed body, your healed life, your healed relationships, your healed finances exist now. You're restoring yourself to it. And so what he is saying here when he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. He's saying to her that she's restored herself back to what has always been true. Not to something that didn't exist, but to something that always exists. And so we recognize that this woman, she could have given up. She could have given up like Darby and his uncle did. Because I'm sure I can use my imagination. I'm sure that in those 12 years, some of those medications might have worked for a couple months, or, she had a little hope that things would work, but then that didn't work, so she had to go to another physician. And then, this physician said, okay, well, you need to do this thing. And that person didn't work. She went to another one. And again, spending money. And so she could have given up. It's been 12 years. She could have given up. She could have just ended her life. That might have felt easier at the time. Or she could have just resigned to suffer. Many of us do that. This is that thing I was talking about last week when I talked about being functionally dysfunctional. Where we just like, this is just what it is. I'm just broken. I'm just, and people are just going to have to deal with my brokenness or understand my brokenness. This is just how I am. And we just resign to suffer. She could have just continued to believe this story, the story that she was bad, that she was wrong, that she was unclean, and then live life as an outsider, just live life on the fringes, whatever that meant. That would have probably meant, getting scraps, not being able to work anywhere, and just living out literally outside of the walls of the community. If you look at what took place in Jerusalem, that's what you were literally outside of the walls. If you had an infirmity. She could have lived that way. She could have believed that she was an outsider. She could have believed that God did not love her. She could have believed that God was punishing her, but she did not believe that. She chose to take a risk of faith. She chose to believe these reports that she had been hearing. Not something that she had seen herself. You got to hear that. The text is clear. She heard reports about Jesus. That could have all been some BS. He could have been a charlatan. And the text is actually clear about that. If you look in the book of Acts, and you have the Jewish elders at the time were trying to figure out what to do with the disciples after Jesus had been crucified. And they talked about the fact, well, he's not the first. Remember a couple years ago, there was this other guy that had people and was doing stuff, and then it all died out. Jesus wasn't the only one that was walking around doing things. So she could have just said, you know what, this is just another one of these people that are talking a good game, but there's no power in it. But she heard the reports, and she believed the reports. And the story of 3 feet from gold, the junk man. I think it's interesting to me even that it's a junk man in the story. When we hold the two stories together, this idea of this woman who was considered an outsider, this woman who was subject to the unfair and unequal patriarchal Levitical law, we have this junk man who was considered less than. As they were trying to just get out of Dodge, like, here, just sell it to this silly man for $100. And I love in the text where Napoleon Hill says, some junk men are dumb, but not this one. He called in a mining engineer. And so similarly, this junk man, he had to believe something different than what Darby and his uncle believed. And he recognized that there is information that I have access to. As you recognize that there's information that you have access to, that you can study, that you can read, to build up your faith, your belief, and your understanding that, oh, wait, the universe is responding to me. Oh, wait, it's through the pattern of my thinking. Let me test this out a little bit. Let me see what's going on. What does life look like if I just start my day with 3 gratitudes each day? And let me see how the day flows from that. And what if I end my evening with 3 gratitudes? Let me see if life is responding to me. If all of a sudden, let me see what happens if instead of fussing about my partner, I begin to say good things about my partner and write those down. If instead of fussing about my job, I begin to look at the positive aspects and write down, what are the things that I love about this thing? What are the things that I like about this thing? What are its positive aspects? And let me see if the universe gives me more of those things. By law of attraction, it does. That's how it works. You're just 3 feet from gold. I invite you to stand in this moment. I understand that many of you have been experiencing some unwanted things for many years, just like this woman. It may have been a year, 12 years. It may feel like your entire life, because it may be experiences and things that happened when you were very young. But I have good news for you. Don't give up. You're just 3 feet from gold. The sun will rise. It's inevitable. That's life, and each day promises us that. As we experience the night, the day is inevitable. The seasons promise that to us. Reverend Shauna spoke to that today, that as we have the darkness of winter, as we have the cold and the ice of winter, it promises that spring will greet us. Nature is designed to remind us of these eternal truths. You're just 3 feet from gold, my brother. You're just 3 feet from gold, my sister. Do not give up now. You've come too far. Don't let go now. You've come too far. Don't stop believing now. Because it is your faith that will make you well. It is your belief that will make you well. It is your knowing that will make you well. It is your study that will make you well. It is your coming back to these ideas over and over and over again that will create the pattern of thought, that will create the momentum, that will shift your life completely. As we take a deep breath in right here and right now and release. Mother, Father, God, I know who and what you are. I know that you are the law in operation. I know that you are not a person, place, or thing, but you are the substance that can become anything. I know that you are the power, the life, the love behind and back and behind, underneath all things. You are the foundation of life. You are the foundation of this earth. You are the foundation of this solar system. You are the foundation of this galaxy and all galaxies beyond. There is no spot where you are not. For you are everywhere and everything, constantly encountered. All power that is expressed in life, that is expressed in existence, is you in expression. All love that is expressed in life, that is in existence anywhere and everywhere, is you being expressed. I recognize and remember right here and right now in this moment that I am one with you. I am one with all life. I am one with all power. I am one with all love. I am one with ease. I am one with peace. I am one with joy. I am one with the goodness that you are. And as I recognize my oneness and remember my oneness, I know that each and every one of my brothers and sisters that are here right now are one with you. They are one with the love that you are. They are one with the joy that you are. They are one with the freedom that you are. They are one with the power that you are. They are one with the healed mind that you are. They are one with the powerful thought that you are. They are one with you. We recognize this just as our elder brother Jesus said that I and the Father are one. So we affirm this same truth right here and right now, that I and you, Mother, Father, God, are one, that we are one with you. As we stand in the profound awareness of our oneness with you, we let go of anything that is unlike this power, that is unlike the greatness of who and what we are. We let go of it right now. We forgive ourselves and we set ourselves free of those old thoughts, the thoughts that we were small, the thoughts that we were unworthy, the thoughts that we were limited. We are not limited, but we are unlimited. We are not small, but we are bigger than anything that we could see, touch, taste, or smell. We affirm right here and right now that the goodness that is you, God, is the goodness that lives within our being down to the very cellular level of who and what we are. I speak to the cells in your body right now, and I call them good. I call them forth to come back into alignment, into restoration with the perfect idea of who and what they are. I speak to every level of your being, your mind, your emotional life, your relationships, your financial life. I speak to it right now, and I call it forth. I call it to come back into alignment with the truth of who and what you are. You remain as God created you, perfect, whole, and complete. I am so grateful and thankful to be in this space with those that are here and within the sound of my voice that are choosing to think a new thought, that are choosing to think a constructive thought, that are choosing to think an affirmative thought, that are choosing to think loving thoughts about ourselves, loving thoughts about our lives, loving thoughts about our families, loving thoughts about our careers and our workplace, loving thoughts about our city, loving thoughts about our nation, loving thoughts about our government, loving thoughts about this planet. Because we recognize that the universe is responding to our thoughts. No longer do we give it thoughts of complaint. No longer do we give it thoughts of doubt. No longer do we give it thoughts of worry. But we create the pattern of thought and focus on it to create the momentum that ultimately creates the shift. And so it is with joy and thanksgiving that I release this prayer, knowing that we are 3 feet from gold and that our healing is inevitable. I now watch for it. I now wait for it. I now look for it. I now sit back with my arms folded, just like that beautiful junk man that watched his millions and millions and millions of dollars come forth out of the ground. So we shall watch our healing after healing after healing after healing come forth easily and effortlessly, and our lives will be changed forever. For this, I am so very grateful. I release this word, and together we say amen, ashe. And so it is. And so it is. Thank you, God.